Do I need another journal in my lineup? Probably not, but I'm gonna make one anyway. Today we are setting up my goals bullet journal for 2024. This one is going in an A5 Archer & Olive notebook, and I figured this one was perfect because it's already got the motivation on the front cover. Jumping straight on into it though, I'm gonna be very adventurous and put my name on the front cover. Normally I don't like to do this because it's the very first page, and if something goes wrong, it's like a bad omen for the journal, but I was very careful, made sure not to smudge it, unlike last time I made a goals journal. If you've been here for a hot minute, then you may recall I have made a goals journal before. It didn't turn out super well, but I have learnt from my mistakes and I am applying them in this setup. More on that in a second, but if you are new here, hello, I am Jess. It is a pleasure to have you here with us. My goals journal is going to be one of many journals in my lineup for the new year, and we already have a bunch of other setups on the channel for some of my other journals, so those will be the ones to check out next. But for now, the nameplate page is finished and we're flipping on into the first official page of the notebook, or at least the first one with dot grid paper. This one was going to be a quote page, thus the label that says quote, but then I was thinking about the fact that navigation in this journal is going to be a little bit more important than it usually is for my everyday journals. In my everyday bullet journals, everything's in sequential order, so having something like an index isn't as important. In this notebook, however, because it's going to be used over a longer span of time, I thought it would be a good idea to have an index so that I can find things more easily. That being said though, I was still very sold on the idea of a quote page, and I still wanted something motivational to start my journal off. To accommodate this desire, rather than putting in a header that says index, I figured that I would cap off the page with my quote. The quote that I opted to go for is, "You have done hard things, you can do hard things." This is something that I like to tell myself anytime I start to get a little bit demotivated, thinking that my goals are like too big or too challenging or too out of my reach. Just having a little reminder to say like, hey, calm down. You've done difficult things before, I'm sure that you can do this difficult thing too. The lettering style that I'm using for the quote, I'm going to be using for the headers in the entire of the journal, at least the main headers on the pages. And this isn't my typical handwriting. My typical handwriting is a lot less fancy than this, but it is a lettering style that I've been practicing over the past, I don't know, year and a bit. So I am getting better at it. One of the key things that I needed for this journal was to make it super easy to get in and use. And that's why the materials that I'm using are very minimalistic compared to some of my other journal setups. Effectively, we have two main materials. One being my writing pen, which I'm just using the Papermate Ink Joy, and another being a grey Tombow dual brush marker. That's an N89, and I do swear it is a little bit darker than it looks like on camera. Turns out that my lights were just super bright today. Because this is going to function as an index page, I wanted to pre-designate the spaces that I'm going to write in the different page titles. So I'm just putting in a small circle as a bullet for where I can write those page titles in. One of the issues that I ran into when doing this setup is that this paper is a little bit different to other paper types that I've had from Archer & Olive. I'm not sure if it's actually different, but it honestly feels like it's coated, and that meant that my pen was taking a lot longer to dry than I'm used to. Because of that, I decided to flip to the back of the notebook and set up a pen testing page, in particular so that I could do a smudge test with this pen and a couple of other ones. I figured that if I found another pen that I enjoyed writing with that didn't smudge, I'd be more inclined to go with that one. Turned out the only one that I could find that didn't really smudge was the Zebra Blen, I think it's called. But I didn't like the way that looked on the page. I much prefer having a very dark black ink, and the Papermate Ink Joy is my favorite writing pen. So I decided just to embrace the smudginess. I didn't really have any big smudging issues in this setup, but the dry time was long enough to bother me mildly. This isn't something that I've found to be typical in Archer & Olive journals. It's really only happened in this one and also in my reading journal, both of which were notebooks from the subscription boxes, so I don't know if that means anything, but it was just an interesting point of comparison. With the pen test done though, it's time to flip on over to our next page. Now when it came to structuring my goal journal, I very much wanted to be mindful of the order that I was putting things in, especially at the start. For me, anything that's going to be a reference material or something that I want to flip back to and be able to find easily, those are the things that should go at the very front. So the first thing I'm putting in here is a page to record types of goals. Now I'm not talking about SMART goals. Honestly, I'm not really a fan of SMART goals. We don't need to get into that right now, but as part of the goal course that I'm developing, I've got my own way of distinguishing types of goals. Yes, you may have heard me mention it before, but I am developing a goals course. It isn't released just yet, but one of my goals for next year is to have that released, because I think it would be so valuable for us to have a community where we're all working on our goals together and motivating each other, holding each other accountable, and all in all just getting things done. If that sounds like something you're interested in, there is more information in the description box about how you can get notified when that course is actually released. And I will be looking for some beta testers, or what I'm going to call founding members. But again, that's going to be happening next year. As you can see, we're already working on the next page though, and this is another reference page where I'm going to be listing out my reflection questions and my goal setting process. Starting first by putting in the cyclic reflection questions. These are reflection questions that I'd ask myself on kind of a monthly basis. For next year though, I'm not going to be doing monthly planning. I'm going to be doing cyclic planning instead. So effectively every 4 weeks. It turns out to be quite similar to a month, but it just aligns a little better with how I actually see the passage of time. I deal much better with time in more equal increments, compared to the kind of random cutoff points that you get throughout a week when you're going with monthly planning. Though you've probably heard it said by like a bajillion other people, but it is so satisfying that 2024 starts on a Monday. The next set of reflection questions I'm putting in though are for quarterly reflection. I like to set my goals on a quarterly basis, so doing a quarterly check-in is really important to that, and I wanted to have a reference for the questions that I ask myself as part of that reflection process. You can see that the handwriting that I'm using here is distinctly different to the lettering that we used for the headers, and this is kind of more akin to my actual handwriting, and using that was a very intentional choice for this notebook. When it comes to goal setting, I need to be able to set things up fast. Oftentimes when I'm doing reflection or brainstorming goals, the ideas are coming very quickly and I want to be able to record them as fast as possible. This often means that the recording step is a little bit messy and done just using my regular everyday handwriting. This was something that I didn't allow myself to do in my first iteration of a goals journal. Not necessarily intentionally, it just turned out that I was being a little bit, I'm gonna say precious, and it's probably exactly what I mean. I was being a little bit precious with it, and it turned out looking very nice. It was very neat, but it didn't necessarily do what I needed it to in terms of goal setting. For this journal in particular though, I am letting go of that preciousness. Yes, things will still be legible, but they don't have to be as neat as I would usually have them. The sections at the top of this page though are for my goal setting process, so the steps that I take to set my goals each quarter, and also some prompts for myself when it comes to brainstorming my goals. Goal brainstorming is one of the second steps that I do in my goal setting process, like after the reflection stage, and it's nice to have a couple of things to think about when it comes to that brainstorming. Flipping over though, and the first page that I'm going to be setting up on the left is for my level 10 life categories and my level 10 life rating scale. If you haven't heard of the level 10 life, the term itself came from The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod, but effectively the idea is that everybody wants to be living their level 10 life, which is that in every category of your life you're at a 10, so it's the best that it possibly can be. But more realistically, most of the time we are not at a level 10 in all things. The way that it is typically applied when it comes to journaling is that you take each of the categories of your life and then rate them out of 10 based on how satisfied or happy you are with them. Now when it comes to this, I am a big believer in 1, picking your life categories yourself because everybody is different, and 2, having some more descriptive explanations of what each number in a 10-point scale actually means. This is mainly because I find it hard each time I do a level 10 life rating to apply the scale in the same way. Because I want to be a little bit more consistent in how I apply that scale, it's important for me to have some kind of a reference that I can come back to for what each number actually means. I also want to make sure that when doing any level 10 life ratings, I'm actually using the same categories each time. Yes, these could in theory change as life goes on, but I want to have the reference here at least for the categories that I'm currently using. In my level 10 life, I have 10 categories that I rate out of 10. Those being physical health, mental health, personal development, home environment, finances, leisure or fun, work, my relationship with my partner Vogel, my relationships with other people in terms of family connections, and then my relationships outside of that with social connections. I like to rank all of those connections differently because to me they would have different goals associated with them. Now that's not to say that I set goals in every single one of these categories every single quarter. In fact, I certainly do not do that. And this is one of the issues that I take with other goal setting systems, especially the ones that prescribe you which categories of life you should be looking at. For instance, if one of the prescribed categories is family and you're estranged from your family, you probably don't have a lot of goals that you want to set in that area. That's just one particular example, but hopefully you can kind of understand what I mean. In terms of the structure of the page though, at the top is where I'm listing out what the categories are, and then at the bottom is where I'm going to put in that rating scale. I do have a draft of the rating scale at this stage, but I want to formalize it before I actually put it into my journal. As said, this journal is going to last me a while. I want these reference pages to be as accurate as they can be, as based on how I like to do my goal setting. When it comes to reference pages though, the ones we've set up so far are the only ones that I need at this stage. So after this, we're getting into the pages related to my goal setting for the new year. In particular, I wanted to have a 2024 milestones page. This could either be for milestones that come from my goal setting and goal getting, so ones that I have intentionally planned out to achieve and then achieved, or it could be for the random ones that happen along the way. Oftentimes we'll have things that are accomplishments or achievements that happen in our life that aren't necessarily from our direct planning. For instance, you might be given an opportunity at work which leads to some kind of bonus or promotion, and that may not necessarily have been a goal that you set out and planned for, but it's still something that was good that happened and something that you could record on a milestone log. That is what this page is for. Not just the things I've planned, but also those other things. You'll notice as we're going through that a lot of these pages are being left open, and that's because the actual population of these pages is going to happen later. At the time of setting these up, it is closer to the start of December, so we still have a bit of this month left to go before I really start thinking about planning out my goals. Though I do want to do that planning before the Christmas period, because I always find that that time between Christmas and the New Year is kind of like a time vortex. Time moves really strangely in that period, and often I don't get as much done as I think I'm going to. I like to hit any new quarter with my goals planned out. So having these pages populated before then is going to be important. Here though you can see we're getting into the spaces that I'm going to be using to set my goals for next year. The first part of this is going to be a quarterly reflection for the previous quarter. Rather than having this one super structured going into it, this is very much going to be a build as you go type layout. So the only section that I'm putting in to start with is the goals that I've worked on and being able to record those and check off the ones that have been completed. Underneath this, I'll go into my reflection questions that I outlined on that previous page, but I'm not going to do that until we get towards the end of this quarter when I'm actually doing my goal setting and reflection, and I can definitively say how many goals I worked on. The next step in my goal setting process though is just to do a brainstorm of the things that I might want to have as my goals. I find that when it comes to doing the whole actual goal setting process, there are often things that we come into the process thinking we might want to have as goals, and getting those out of my head and onto paper honors the idea. We're letting it take up space in the journal, saying yes, you had the thought, let's put it down, but not necessarily committing to it until later steps in the goal setting. That's because sometimes the initial thoughts we have for our goals don't actually end up being the things we do work on. They might be things that we want to do at some point, but they're not necessarily things we want to do in the next quarter or the next year or whatever span of time you like to use. When it comes to my brainstorming for my goals, I like to do this in two ways. One of them being a mind map, where I kind of link ideas together and branch out from just the central theme of 2024 goals in this case, and then just as a general list. The mind mapping is more specifically for my different life areas, so thinking about any goals related to work, any goals related to social connection, related to health, etc. Whereas the list that I'm going to have on the right hand side is just for anything else that doesn't necessarily relate specifically to one of those categories, or if it does, I just want to write it down somewhere quickly. Again, just to give myself that little dopamine kick of yes, you had a thought, we will write it down. I know that possibly sounds a little bit patronizing, but it's one of those things that if I don't reward myself for having the thought, then my brain just gets persnickety at me hello, I'm over here doing all this work, why aren't you rewarding me? Give me compliments. Anyway, once the mind map and the brainstorming spaces were done though, then it's time to flip on over to our next goal setting stage, which is when I like to do my level 10 life check-in. This one I typically do as a small graph, and in this case I'm doing it so that my categories are along the side, and then the numbers 1 through 10 are along the top. For each of the categories, when it comes to doing my goal setting, I'll rate each of those out of 10 using the scale that we have on that reference page from before, and then the last 2 columns on that space are a place to say whether the number went up or down compared to my last rating, and how much it changed by. This is something that I like to keep track of, just so I can see that I'm tending in the right direction when it comes to my life areas, and if there are any that have had quite a drastic change, either positive or negative, I can think about why that might be. Normally it's a little bit more fun to think about why something might have increased rather than decreased, but both of them can offer valuable insights. The section underneath this though is a place to talk about my values. These are typically the same each time I set my goals, but doing this goal setting process is a nice opportunity just to check back in and think about, am I doing things that align with my values? Your values don't have to be huge, hard-hitting, flowery language things. For instance, for me, one of my core values is comfort. Pretty much any of the decisions I make align with the idea of maintaining comfort. And while this does have its positives, so for instance, prioritizing having safe and inviting spaces for my social connections and our community, this can also be a little bit detrimental in that I'm sometimes apprehensive to step outside of my comfort zone. In this section though, I effectively can just outline what are my values and think about any goals that I might have related to them. As said, all of these spaces are for goal setting, so the focus here really is how might these things be related to goals that I want to work on in the upcoming period. On the right hand side though, this is where we have spaces for things that I'm enjoying or I'm excited about at the moment, and things that I want to achieve. These could be short-term things that I want to achieve, or they might be quite long-term, like bigger life goals. I think we could all spout off maybe 2 to 3 things that we would like to do at some point in our lives, but there's a pretty big difference between at some point versus in the next 3 months. I like to keep those bigger long-term visions in mind, just so when the timing is right, I can actually start working on some of those. Not all of the things that I write here are necessarily going to get worked on in the next 3 months, but it's still nice to remind myself of those things that I want to achieve. When it comes to goal setting, along with the positive and exciting things, I also like to think about the not so fun things. So this next page is very much about the less fun stuff. In particular, I have a section to write out things that are bothering me, whether they be big or small things, because in identifying those, I can start to think of ways around them or ways forward. For instance, if it bothers you that every time you go into your office, it feels like a cluttered mess and you can't get anything done because all of your stuff is distracting you, then maybe one of your goals should be about making a more peace-inducing space. I find that identifying pain points and then thinking of ways to address them is a really good way to identify goals. The section underneath this is my Uncomfy with section, a place to write out things that make me uncomfortable or I'm not as comfortable with, and in particular those that could be translated into a goal. So for instance, if you're not super comfortable with public speaking, do you maybe want to set a goal around improving that? That could be something like joining Toastmasters or starting a YouTube channel. Not everything that we're uncomfortable with is going to end up as a goal, but it's also going to be nice to look back on these sections over multiple iterations of my goal setting and see how my discomforts changed. On the right hand side of my spread is our next step in the goal setting process, and this is thinking about things that I want to keep doing, start doing, and stop doing. This is mainly related to habits and any that I want to maintain, build, or break. Again, I'm not necessarily going to work on all of these all at once or all in this upcoming quarter, but the purpose of having all of these different check-in points or all of these different ways to think about our goals is so that we can identify themes. Flipping over, that is going to be the next section we set up because it's in identifying the themes that then I can start to pick out what my goals will actually be. This is going to be another one of those layouts that's very much build as you go. So after I've identified the themes or patterns from each of the previous sections, so that could be in terms of goal areas or specific goals even, then I can use those themes to figure out what my goals are going to be, write them out as simple statements that kind of resonate with me, and then I can rate the goals in terms of how epic they are. EPIC is an acronym. It stands for enjoyable, practical, impactful, and challenging. And the long story short of it is that the higher the EPIC score, the more likely it is that that goal is not going to be as hard for me to get done compared to other ones. We'll talk more about EPIC goals in my goal course, but But here I'm flipping to the back of my journal and saving all of those little post-its that I've been using throughout the setup. That's because a lot of these pages I'm going to be setting up again each quarter, so having the little post-its there as a reference in the order that I set up the different sections is just going to be helpful. As we saw, the first page that I set up in this one was an index, so we do have to go in and add all of the different pages into there, because otherwise the index isn't super helpful. If you don't keep it updated, then navigation through the index doesn't really work. As we fill this in though, I hope you're excited for your goals in the year or period ahead. Let me know in the comments one of the things you're thinking about working on. But if goal-related content is something you enjoy, then do make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We're going to have plenty more goal-related content coming up, and I wouldn't want you to miss out. Having a flip through of the pages we've set up in this journal, I am feeling very optimistic about this one. I know my previous goal journal didn't work as well for me because I wasn't as intentional about setting it up and how I was going to use it, and setting it up in a way that aligned with how I was going to use it, but this one is set up much better for how I like to set my goals. If you wanted to see more goal-related content, then the playlist we have on screen here is the one to check out next. That one has things like actual examples of setting goals in my journal and how I use this process, so click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.